everyone, and in today's video I will be talking about basics of Agile estimates. I will be talking about some of the key terminologies and techniques that we can use in Agile estimates. I will be covering what is a reference story, what is a non-linear estimates, and some of the key challenges and issues in Agile estimates. I want to keep this video as short as possible. Let's go and check it out. Let's first talk about estimate. Estimate is simply an effort required to complete a particular task. So it has three important components that we have to keep in mind. That is, what is the amount of work that has to be done to derive this particular effort? What is the complexity of the work? And what is the uncertainties that are involved in carrying out this particular work? So if you know these three things, it is very easy to derive an effort for a particular task. Okay, let's move on and understand the difference between an estimation and planning. This can be better explained with an example. Let's say, for an example, your manager comes and asks you, what is the effort required to complete a particular task by this Friday? Then he is not asking for an estimate, rather he is asking for a planning. So that is the very simplest way of explaining you the difference between an estimate and a plan. All right, let's move on to the next one, is showcasing you what can change in a project and what can be negotiated. So of many different parameters, I thought of keeping the key components here: the scope, schedule and estimate. Of these three, the estimate is the one that is non-negotiable. Alright, so you can negotiate the scope or schedule, but estimate cannot be negotiated. So this you have to be keep very solid in your mind when you are coming up with estimates and committing it to the customers. Alright. Then talking about story point estimates. So this is the one that is predominantly used in most of the Agile projects, and it follows a relative estimation technique rather than an absolute estimation. So what is a relative estimate? I'm going to estimate something based on my past experience. That's what this relative estimate is all about. And when you're talking about Agile projects, your relative estimate should be based on your past experience in a current project or in a similar project before this to get a more accurate estimate. What are the advantages of relative estimate, relative story point estimate in particular? The first is it is independent of individual team level skills. That means, let me explain this with an example. Let's take two persons, a rabbit and a tortoise, and if you go ahead and ask them what is the time it's going to take to cover 1 mile between point A and B, in absolute estimate, a rabbit might say it might take 1 hour and a tortoise might say 2 hours. But when it comes to story point estimates, both might incline and might say come up with one, it might take one story point. And don't think about the hours it takes to cover this one story point. It differs, but in a story point estimates, all that we are going to talk about is story points. Okay, so both has a very good probability of saying it's going to take one story point because it's a smaller effort. So that is one of the advantages, main advantage. And there are a lot of other advantages in doing a relative story point estimates. They are, the first one is it has no emotional attachments because it's just numbers. It doesn't attach itself to any kind of comparative matrix here. Estimation is faster, obviously. It's more relative in nature and less unhealthy competition. So these are some of the key points when we are talking about relative estimates. Some of the other Agile estimation terms would involve velocity. This is one of the key terms that we hear a lot of times. So velocity is the total effort that is required by the team in a sprint. Okay, that's what is velocity all about. Then focus factor. Usually we don't use the other two terms that I'm going to talk about. Focus factor, but good to know. Focus factor is how focused the team is while executing a particular sprint, I might say. So it can be calculated easily by taking actual velocity dividing by available days. For example, say 18 is the velocity and 30 is the available days, then the focus factor is 60%. Meaning 60% the team is focused and 40% the team is not focused. Maybe they might be doing some other activities or meetings or unplanned leaves. It might be anything of that nature. So ideal days is the what to say that is the number of days the team has worked without any distractions. So this can be calculated by using the available days into focus factor. So in our example, if we say the available days is 40 and if you multiply the focus factor 60%, you will get 24 days. So what does this mean is if you are having a task that is going to take 24 days to complete, then a team which is having a focus factor of 60% is going to take 40 days to complete the task. That's as simple as that. So ideal days is characterized by these things. It is having no multitasking done, work without any disturbance, all resources are available, no interruptions and no unplanned leaves, and many other characteristics you might add if you know. So these are the things that is going to constitute an ideal days. All right. So let's move on and understand what the reference story is. Let's take for example, if you have a product backlog, okay, and in this you are having 21 user stories. You take one medium-sized random user story, you groom it, you individually estimate it, you compare the estimates, you finalize the estimate, and you get team consensus on this estimate, and then you mark this story as a reference story. In this example, the estimate that we have, the team has derived is 2 story points. The most important thing that we have to understand in a story point a referencing meeting is that everybody should be well aware of what the particular story is about. They need to know in and out, both technically and non-technically, not in terms of coding, but at least they need to know the functional aspects of it, all the dependencies. In other words, I would say that they need to know the complete nature of the story. All the members of the team, like including the business analysts, the developers, testers, everyone, and reference the story. So this is going to really help them in future estimation, because the reference story is going to serve when we are doing a relative estimate, right? So this is one key important concept that we need to understand when we are doing estimation in Agile relative estimates. Then is the non-linear estimate. Most of the projects follow this non-linear estimation technique. So what is that? The story point is going to somewhat look like 1, 3, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13 and 21, from which a developer can choose to assign to a particular task or a user story. So why not we follow a non-linear technique like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 98, 99, 100. So this can be best explained with an example. Let's take a person is given with 2 weights, 1 kg and 2 kg, and if he is asked which one is the least among them, or he is in a better chance to identify it. Okay, he can say this weight is 1 kg, the other one is 2. So you can easily differentiate between 2 effort. If another person is given, or if the same person for that matter is given with 2 different weights of 99 and 100 kgs, he will not be in a position to identify which one is heavier. So linear estimates tend to be not so much of usefulness when calculating efforts for higher weights, because it does not add the material weight into the estimates. So that's the reason non-linear estimates come up with. So this kind of technique is called as a Weber law, and Weber's law is applied to this non-linear estimates, and we came up with this user story 1, 2, 3, 5 and 8. So if you look at the particular behavior of non-linear estimates, you can see the difference between 1 and 2 is 100%, 2 and 3 is 60%, 3 and 5 is 60%, and it goes on. And this is called as Fibonacci sequence. So what did we incur by looking at this is, when you have a story which is of two-story point that we have already completed successfully, and you are given with a new task which is 60%, which takes 60% more effort than the one that we completed with the two-story point, then we can easily say the new task is three-story point. If it is 60% more than three-story point, then we can say it is five-story point. So by this, it becomes very easy for us to relatively estimate our user stories. Okay. So to be honest, I don't think I've seen teams who knows Fibonacci sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they really don't know the underlying concept behind this, so that they usually tend to give very unrealistic story points, because they don't understand this effort involved between 2 and 3, or 3 and 5 for that matter. So this is all about nonlinear estimates. Let's move on and look at some of the key challenges that are involved in estimate. The first thing is an anchoring effort. This can be better explained with an example. Let's say that you go into a like a grocery, not a grocery. Let's say you are going into a shop, and you look at a T-shirt which is marked at a price tag of 300 rupees. Then so this particular amount gets into your anchor, or I would say anchored into your mind. Later on, you go inside your store and see a T-shirt which is of 100 rupees. All right. So immediately your mind says that this T-shirt is the cheapest T-shirt in the world, which actually might not be. The actual value of the T-shirt might be even 50 rupees. But the initial value that was anchored to you was the 300 rupees. When you entered into the store, gets anchored into your mind, which will result in an underestimating or overestimating a price. So that is called as an anchoring effect, and we should be very careful of these effects when you are working with the projects. Okay. The next one is cost of multitasking. So this analysis I basically pulled out online, which says a person who's working one task is taking 65% of the time. If he's taking two story points here, two tasks, concurrent tasks, is 82%. It takes 82% of the time to complete the task. This 82% probability of completion. His performance is improved when he's doing two concurrent tasks, and his performance is gradually reducing as it takes more tasks. So cost of multitasking has an impact on estimates. So we have to be a little bit careful in this area. Then ignoring the uncertainties. This is predominantly most of the team does. They just look at the things that they know. We don't usually look at things that we don't know. So we have to factor in those. So there is a whole range of risk management that is there in addressing this effort. But it is always good to know the uncertainties that are involved in carrying out a particular task. And finally, one of the key things is non-functional requirements. We totally ignore this, such as logging, tracing, auditing, performance testing, CI/CD deployments. All these are non-functional requirements that add effort into your existing task. So all this has to be factored in when you are estimating. Okay. So these are some of the key challenges. There are many others, but these are some of the key things that we have to keep in mind when we are estimating. The next one is some of the challenges that we face, practical challenges that I would say that we will face in our day-to-day sprint planning activities. The first thing is the story is not groomed properly. So stories needs to be groomed properly before you are entering into a planning stage. I see teams pulling in stories with just a description. They don't have an assigned to, they don't have a description, they don't have acceptance criteria, and they request the team to give an estimate. So which usually ends up in overestimate, like 20 story points or something like that, because a lot of uncertainties, or it might end up in an underestimate, wherein the team member will be cornered in the end, asking for wrong estimates. So these are some of the things that we have to avoid by grooming the stories at least close to 90%. This is not a requirement. Stories are not requirement. They are just elaborate in time, but it has to be at least a sufficient amount of acceptance criteria has to be provided, so that the team can estimate with a good estimate, I would say. The next one is lack of knowledge on story point size. Yeah, as I already said, the relative estimate that we talked about, non-linear estimation. Most of the team doesn't even know the difference between 2 and 3. Why they have to give a 2 and why they have to give a 3. So if you know if you understand the Weber's law, and if you understand the difference between 2 and 3 is a 60% more effort, then it's quite beneficial for the team to relatively estimate and give a very good story points for the user stories. Changing story point during the sprint, not allowed. Once the planning is done, the stories are frozen. So I have seen teams who change the story points dynamically in the sprint. So that is going to impact us in a retrospective that will not be able to retrospect properly. Adding acceptance criteria and more scope in the same story during the sprint. So if you have to add more scope and more work, you create a new story or put it in backlog, but it is so critical that it has to be done in the same sprint. Create a new story and add it, so that the story that is already planned gets completed. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for us to retrospect and deliver value out of it. Some of the other issues is, this is a really big issue, that we give larger stories like 8 story points, 13 story points. Anything beyond 8 is really considered as big stories. It needs to be definitely broken down into small stories. The best practice is try to break the user stories into one story point, which is a challenging task, I know that, but as much as possible, if we can get it into one story point, 2 or 3 story points, there is a better chance of getting the stories completed and moving forward with other stories. Otherwise, we will be sticking to one story that will never end for 5 to 6 sprints, which will evenly get escalated, and the team member would be questioned. So in order to avoid all these issues, it is better to groom properly, get a good understanding of the story point estimations, and to break the stories into smaller stories. So this is a quick video on basics of estimates and estimation techniques that we can use in our day-to-day sprint planning activities. There are other planning or estimation techniques that is available, like planning poker, t-shirt sizing, bucket sizing. There are a lot of interesting estimation techniques that is available, which I'll be creating more videos on that in my future clips. For now, this is all I have. Thank you.